Let's see what a few armies of new space dwarves could look like on the table then, and how their forces might be built in-game. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where we're continuing in our look through the Leagues of Votann Codex, and I thought it might be fun to throw a few prospective army lists together to see how a force might get together on the table. Here's just a few army list ideas going around a few themes in the Codex, one from the Greater Thurian League, an armoured one with +1 toughness, and one with some heavy lifting Kronus melee. First up, we'll start with the Thurian one. It certainly seems to be one of the leagues that people are thinking about experimenting with most. A single hit or wound reroll whenever you shoot or fight is pretty handy, and gives you more chances to fish for auto wounds. They count judgment tokens as being one judgment token more, so if you have one judgment token on them, then they count as two, and can also dole out another one with a Carl's Appraising Glare. They also give you access to the special character Uthar the Destined, who seems to have a special friendship with railguns. Perhaps the core damage and durability list is built around Uthar the Destined, a Brockier Forge Master, and 2 land fortresses. The land fortresses each have the railgun, the auto cannons, and bolt cannons, so a fair amount of damage to shooting, plus 2 massive anti-tank shots. The Grimnir is massively worth it next to them. He'll make one of them hit on 2s. With his Warlord trait, he'll be healing 1 for 4 wounds each turn. And he has a Warlord trait to make 1 failed damage result just get nullified each turn as well. Really powerful if you just negate a melter shot or something. And he can also chip away with his grav rifle. Uthar's the Warlord and will be able to hand out judgment tokens. Very important for putting the railgun into rage mode, but on top of that he's got an Ancestral Fortune special rule, which seems almost broken when combined with the railgun. Once per battle round he can change a hit roll to an unmodified 6. That means that the railgun will auto wound against the judgment token. That unmodified 6 then counts as an unmodified 6 to wound, which gives you 2d3 plus 6 wounds on the enemy, potentially wiping out anything from a 10 wound battle tank to a squad of guardsmen or 5 space marines. It's pretty mad, provided you're in range and line of sight, it'll just pretty much delete something, never mind the other value that he has with giving out re-rolls and being a somewhat decent combat character as well. With that little combo in the centre, they should be really hard to damage and also put out some massive railgun fire. He's also the Warlord as well, so can put a judgment token on a different unit too with Experienced Eye. Finally, and rounding out the HQ section, we've got the Grimnir. He's just the basic form and takes the command point spell and Fortify, generating a command point a turn, making his one squad a little bit harder to kill, maybe smiting if he needs to. And I'd also give him the Thurian League Warlord trait for farming command points as well. I did forget to include it here. Moving on to squads, and we've got 3 units of 10 Hearthkin warriors, each of which has a medipack and 1 rail rifle in the squad for a little bit more anti-tank ignores invul's goodness. Their main job is going to be securing objectives and maybe sniping off the odd thing with those rail rifles. Again, they can be a seriously scary just about anti-anything threat if you do get lucky with that auto wound from a judgment. There's then 2 units of Hernkin with the rotary cannons, fast-moving scouts who can pre-game move and put out at least a decent amount of fire. They're mainly there to get pre-game objectives and can zoom very far if needed for 1 CP with that accelerated stratagem. Then in the other big damage combo of the list, there's a big unit of 10 Ioneer Hearthguard, the Votann Terminators with the Vulcanite weapons and the Plasma Blade Gauntlet, and the Sergeant takes a Concussion Hammer and Teleport Crest. They also pick up the -1 to hit relic at greater than 12 inches. The plan with them is for them to start also next to Uthar and the Forge Master. Uthar will give the squad his 4 rerolls to hit in the command phase, and then they'll use that site-to-site teleportation stratagem to jump somewhere else on the board. A stratagem that would normally cost 2 CP, but here it would cost 1 due to the Brockhere's Botanic Council upgrade, and then you've potentially got a very scary squad in range with a whole ton of mortal wound producing Vulcanite blasters. 6s to hit with those cause 1 mortal wound instead of regular damage, you get 30 shots, you'd average 6 hits, and then if you go 4 hit rolls fishing for hits, you should be averaging something like 10 or 11. It'll be followed up by a bunch of anti-infantry hits, so that should be a pretty reliable kill on something very early on, never mind what all their grenade launchers do, and the fact that they've got a potential for a 9-inch charge, which if they make it, then they're going to do major damage with their melee. Certainly quite a pricey setup, but jumping them across the board seems like a good way of countering the Votann's slow movement. Finally, just for 1 extra threat, there's a Sagittor with a Matter autocannon. It could just operate independently, or it could take the 5 Chthonian Berserks in it, and give them a fast moving boost somewhere into the midfield, so they can hopefully charge out and wreck something after. Overall, I'd expect competitive Votann lists to at least look somewhat similar to this when we do get people winning tournaments with them. The Land Fortress railguns for ignore invuls and splash damage just seem too good to pass up. Uthar and the Forge Master can keep them very dangerous and somewhat safe with the Forge Master's protection, and I feel like that exo armor bomb does look pretty scary, at least on paper. Otherwise, I think they are going to need a decent amount of bodies to put on objectives. I feel like most lists are probably going to run a battalion and need multiple units of Hearthkin warriors, and those Hernkin bikes seem like they're necessary for fast movement onto objectives early. Moving on to a second idea though, here's one with a lot of toughness 8 and 9 armor from the Urani-Surtr Regulates. I must admit I'm maybe a little bit 50-50 on this one. The +1 toughness is absolutely awesome, and does seem to be just what the Votann want, as they want to be tanking the enemy shots before hitting back hard. They do have an army-wide thing where they count as everything as having 1 judgment token on it, which means that if you get a 6 then you're going to be auto-wounding pretty much all the time. But I'm not sure if it's quite enough to pass up the good stuff of other leagues. I think it perhaps looks particularly interesting on things like the Land Fortress and Sagittars though. The Land Fortress is a big Land Raider-esque toughness 8, so with this league it goes all the way to toughness 9, which seems pretty ridiculous, particularly given it's got void armor and a decent defensive profile. Having 3 of them with toughness 9 and rail cannons that are pretty much effective against most things looks very intimidating on paper at least. And if you've already got a slightly problematic amount of armor, I suppose the opponent will probably struggle to deal with a whole bunch of Sagittars on top of that, particularly when they're toughness 8. I've chosen to include 6 of them in the list, as you can take 2 per fast attack slot. 2 units of 2 with the bolt cannons at 36 inches and the Sagittar missiles, 2 shots at strength 10 and damage 3, and then a couple of cheaper ones with the Matter auto cannons for a bunch more damage 2 shots. If you do want to go absolutely max vehicles, then you do have to make some concessions somewhere, either giving up a lot of CP or basically taking no Hernkin. Here I've decided to make the Warlord's Battalion a patrol one and also add an Outrider as well. So after Warlord traits the list does only start on the 1 CP, which isn't ideal. Still though, there's a lot of very tough void armor wounds on the table. The Sagittars move 12 inches, which is nice for Votann, and the Land Fortresses move 10. Besides the 2 railguns and 8 missile shots, the list packs a pretty spectacular 90 AP-2 damage 2 shots. With judgment token buffs, that seems like that's going to be pretty massive and absolutely ruin the majority of targets that are out in the open. To fill out the list for support, there's the Brockier Forge Master again with the Warlord trait, negating incoming damage, doing big repairs, and making a land fortress hit on 2s. And he's backed up with a high Carl to dole out some judgment tokens, hopefully getting at least a few of the more important ones up to 2 judgment tokens, with combining his use and the one that you give for objectives. Then to ride in a couple of the Sagittars, there's 2 units of Hearthkin warriors, and then 3 units of Hernkin pioneers as well, 2 of which take rotary cannons and a searchlight if you do need to hand out another judgment token to something important. It certainly doesn't have a lot of Auspex bodies and will probably struggle with secondaries, but it just seems like there's a ridiculous amount of shooting coming out of these guys, all on platforms that move a decent distance as well, and really like judgment tokens. In any sort of straight fight, I feel like you'd have to alpha strike this really hard, and even then they're going to hit you back pretty hard with the amount of shots and anti-tank guns they get. Finally, for a bit more of a fun experiment, here's one with Kronus Hegemony melee. The Kronus Hegemony are the fighty Votann, +1 attack, +1 strength, and an extra AP-1 on their combat if they have 2 judgment tokens on the target. A pretty massive cluster of combat buffs there. That amount of power could even make standard Hearthkin warriors kind of dangerous in combat, I think. Leading the list, we've got a high Carl with experienced eye for extra judgment tokens, and Flair, the axe that gives him 3 attacks. Maybe could wiggle it round to give him the Relic Mass Gauntlet instead. That one also seems good. There's then a Lord Grimnir, the upgraded version of the standard one, with the staff that gives him all the spells. He can cast 3 casts, so can fire out some mortal wounds, in addition to farming some CP, and giving 1 unit +1 toughness and a 6+ feel no pain. He also takes the Warlord traits to make 1 unit Obsec as well. He should be helping the Einhir Hearthguard. There's then an Einhir champion with Exactor, the Relic Mass Hammer. That's the one that gets mortal wounds on 6s to hit, and he takes the Warlord trait Exemplary Hero for just flat re-roll hits. That one means that he can fish for those 6s and has a good chance of doling out a massive amount of mortal wounds on the enemy, never mind the attacks that he actually gets with his D3+3 hammer. He's also got that stratagem that allows him to advance 12 inches. You wouldn't be able to charge after it, but that could set him up in somewhere very threatening. Moving on to squads, for once we're leaving the land fortresses at home, so we're bringing quite a lot of just standard Votann to the table. We've got 2 units of Hearthkin warriors with bolters, the medic, and a plasma sword. Perhaps could have found some room for some heavy weapons on them. but in general they're trying to act as a bit more of a combaty bully type unit. And then advancing up the board, there's 20 Hearthkin warriors with ion blasters, a medic and a concussion gauntlet. If the enemy gets too close, then they should be able to activate that ion blaster mortal wound stratagem that could deal some hefty damage. There's then 2 big units of 10 Einherjar Hearthguard, the exosuits armed with plasma guns, concussion gauntlets, a shield crest and a concussion hammer. They're going to be the main tanky force slogging up the board. One unit will be supported by the Grimnir for Obsec and the extra toughness, and they can pick up some rerolls from the High Carl and the Einherjar Champion too. They are pretty slow and they won't be able to shoot if they advance, so that is a bit of an issue, but hopefully they should just be able to stomp towards midfield objectives, hold them against all comers, while dishing out some dangerous plasma fire with high AP. Again, we've got a couple of units of Hernkin for the fast-moving Obsec. They both take the rotary cannon and the searchlight. Again, they can be a bit more threatening in combat than normal with this one, and extra strength and potentially AP-1 will do quite a bit. They could bully some light infantry at the very least after dealing with all their shots. Finally, there's 2 units of Chthonian Berserks with plasma axes. Depending on terrain and things, maybe they could ride in the Sagittars, both with Sagittar missiles, or potentially just lurk within the ranks behind terrain and act as a bit of a countercharge threat. If they do catch anything in Kronus, they should be ridiculously dangerous. The plasma axes have a 2 attack profile, which would make them 8 attacks at strength 6, AP-3, damage 1 each, potentially with judgment tokens for extra AP and auto wounds. They've also got the command points to reroll all hits as well, so auto wounds should come in plenty. I do feel that while the list has quite a lot of might and is fairly tough in terms of the number of void armor bodies that it puts on the board, I perhaps feel that the melee damage might be just a little bit limited. The opponent would have to come at least fairly close to you to get any charges. I do kind of worry if this might be just a bit outmaneuvered and not really have all that much shooting to make the enemy suffer. Still though, it seems like a list that would dominate the midfield at least for the first few turns. There's quite a lot of units here that the foe just really couldn't afford to get too close to with anything that they didn't want to have massive damage on. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed just a little bit of theory crafting with Votann armies. My current guess is that competitive lists might start looking something similar to the first one out of the 3, though I appreciate it's early days right now. The amount of hurt that you can put out with fairly fast moving vehicles though does seem kind of concerning too. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and particularly which units you think are going to get played and how regularly in the Votann lists. It does seem that at least most of the datasheets are very usable indeed though. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the regular 40k stuff coming. I post videos just about every day, and there'll be plenty more for the Votann. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics has a Patreon page as well. You can find that down in the video description below if you're interested. It is what allows me to keep on making videos like this quite so regularly. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, an absolutely massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.